There is a sound older than your fear, older than the debt, older than the doubt, older than every night you counted what wasn't there and felt the cold weight of not enough press against your chest like a stone. This sound was spoken in sacred chambers, in desert temples, in the breathless silence before dawn broke over ancient mountains, and it carries within its syllables a frequency so precise, so quantum in its nature, that the moment it enters your body, something in your cellular architecture begins to shift. You did not find this by accident. The algorithm does not govern the sovereign moves of the divine. You were guided here because a gate in your life is ready to open, and the key has always been a sound. I want you to feel something right now before we go any further. Place your right hand over your heart and your left hand open on your lap, palm facing the ceiling. Feel the warmth between your palm and your chest. That warmth is not just body heat. That is the frequency of readiness. That is the energetic signature of a soul that has been in waiting long enough. The universe does not keep a soul waiting forever. There is a season for planting, and there is a season when the harvest simply cannot be delayed any longer. I believe, with every fiber of my spiritual understanding, that you have arrived at your harvest season, and YESERAYE EFFATA is the sacred utterance that will confirm it across every dimension of your life. What I am about to share with you has roots in the most ancient traditions of divine invocation. It is not a trend. It is not a shortcut. It is a technology of the spirit, older than printed religion, older than cathedral stone, older than the written word itself. Sound was the first act of creation. Before light, there was vibration. Before form, there was frequency. And within the sacred chant of YESERAYE EFFATA, that original creative frequency is preserved like light held inside a crystal, waiting for a vessel worthy of receiving it. Today, that vessel is you. By the time we move through this journey together, your perception of lack, that slow, insidious voice that tells you the gates are closed to you specifically, that provision flows around you but never toward you, that perception will not simply be quieted. It will be permanently dissolved. Not suppressed. Not managed. Dissolved at the root, at the quantum level where belief becomes biology and thought becomes reality. This is not motivational language. This is the science of spiritual alignment dressed in the vocabulary of faith. And this leads us to the first truth, the one most people never dare to face, which we will unlock right now in this opening chapter. The gates of divine provision are not locked against you because you are unworthy. Let me say that again, slowly, so it can travel past your ears and settle somewhere deeper. You were never the reason the gates felt closed. The sealing of abundance in a person's life is never a cosmic punishment. It is never divine rejection. It is always the result of a frequency mismatch, a vibrational wall built brick by brick through years of inherited lack consciousness, cultural programming, and unprocessed grief about what was never received. The gate was never locked from the outside. It was sealed from within. Think about the stories you were told about money before you were old enough to question them. Think about the phrases spoken at dinner tables, in church pews, in the tired voices of parents who worked themselves hollow and still came up short. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are greedy. We are simple people. God wants us humble, not wealthy. These are not truths. These are transmission errors, corrupted files passed from one generation to the next, encoded so deeply into the nervous system that they began to function as spiritual law. But they are not law. They are limitation masquerading as virtue, and today we are calling them by their true name. Here is what the ancient wisdom keepers understood that modern culture has largely forgotten. The field of divine supply, what I call the infinite ocean of provision, is not a reward system. It does not withhold from the undeserving and pour out upon the virtuous. It is a responsive field. It mirrors. It reflects. It amplifies whatever frequency it receives from a living soul. And when a soul carries, deep in its energetic structure, the signal of lack, the field responds with lack. Not as punishment, but as pure resonance. You cannot tune a radio to one frequency and receive another station. The universe operates on the same quantum principle, ancient and unstoppable. The moment this understanding enters your body, not just your mind, but your body, your breath, your nervous system, something remarkable begins to happen. The wall starts to crack. Not because you forced it, not because you worked harder or said the right affirmations in the right order. It cracks because awareness itself is a form of light, and light, even the smallest beam of it, dissolves darkness not through conflict but through presence. You become aware of the frequency mismatch, and in that awareness, you gain the sovereign power to change the signal you are broadcasting to the divine field. And this is precisely where the sacred chant of YESERAYE EFFATA becomes not just spiritual poetry, but a precise quantum instrument. Because changing a deep-rooted frequency is not primarily an intellectual exercise. It is not accomplished by reading the right books or attending the right seminars, though those things have their place. The most ancient wisdom traditions across every culture on this earth arrived at the same conclusion: the fastest, most direct path to rewiring the frequency of a human soul is through sacred sound, through intentional vibration, through chant. The body is an instrument, and it must be played correctly before the music of abundance can flow through it without obstruction. Now, I need you to understand something about the name YESERAYE before we go further, something that the surface-level interpretation will entirely miss. This is a sacred identifier that carries within its phonetic structure a multi-layered invocation. It is not a name in the way we casually use names. It is a key signature, a frequency blueprint encoded in syllables, and when it is spoken or heard with intentional awareness, it activates specific resonance chambers within the human energy field. The ancient understanding was that certain names, certain words, held the compressed memory of divine encounters, and speaking them was not merely an act of language but an act of energetic contact. You were not just saying a word. You were reaching through the word to touch the reality it represented. And Effata, the second half of this sacred command, carries a weight that I want you to feel physically. Effata is the imperative, the decree, the sovereign declaration that what has been closed must now open. It appears across sacred traditions not as a request but as a command spoken from the position of divine authority, the authority of a soul that knows its source, that has identified itself with the infinite rather than with its circumstances. When you speak Effata, you are not begging a locked gate to open. You are declaring from the frequency of your highest self that the gate no longer has the authority to remain closed. There is a difference between a prayer of pleading and a decree of alignment, and that difference is everything. And this is the threshold we are crossing together right now. From pleading to decree, from hoping to knowing, from the outside of the gate, pressing your hands against its cold surface, to standing in the full sovereignty of someone who carries the resonant key within their own voice, their own breath, their own heartbeat. The gate responds to frequency, not force. And the frequency is already within you. It simply needs to be unlocked, activated, and amplified. That is the work of this entire journey. And this leads us to what I was building toward, the vibrational anatomy of the sacred name itself, which we step into next. Close your eyes for just a moment, or soften your gaze if you are driving, if you are walking, if you are moving through the ordinary world while something extraordinary begins to stir inside you. I want you to hear this name not with your ears but with the deeper listening apparatus that lives beneath language, beneath thought, beneath the constant noise of the analytical mind. Hear it the way a tuning fork hears another tuning fork across a room, not through effort, but through resonance. Let it land. Let the syllables find their places inside you the way a key finds the precise architecture of a lock it was carved to open. Something in you already recognizes this. Something in you has been waiting for exactly this sound. The name YESERAYE is not ornamental. It is not spiritual decoration placed upon a video to create atmosphere or emotional effect. Every syllable within it carries a compressed vibrational instruction, a command encoded at the level of frequency that the conscious mind cannot fully decode but the soul reads fluently. The opening syllable, YE, is a breath sound, an exhalation of the divine that mimics the most fundamental act of creation itself. Ancient breath traditions across Ethiopia, across the Hebrew mystical schools, across the Coptic sacred libraries, all identified this particular phoneme as a vessel for divine initiation. When you hear it, something in your respiratory system responds before your intellect can even register that a word has been spoken. That is not coincidence. That is design. The central syllable, Sarah, carries what the ancient sound scholars called the bridge frequency, the vibration that connects the human field to the divine field, the earthly request to the heavenly response. Think of it as the resonant middle, the place where two tuning forks, one human and one celestial, are brought close enough that they begin to vibrate in sympathy. Sarah is the moment of contact. It is the suspended breath between asking and receiving, between the planted seed and the first green shoot breaking through dark soil. When this syllable passes through your field, whether you speak it or hear it, it creates a microsecond of energetic opening, a gap in the wall of frequency mismatch, through which divine supply can begin to flow like golden light through a crack in ancient stone. And then the return. YE again, closing the name in a perfect circle of vibrational intention. This is not accidental structure. The ancient wisdom builders who encoded sacred names understood that circular phonetic architecture, sound that begins and ends at the same frequency, creates a loop, a sustained resonance that does not dissipate the moment the sound fades but continues to vibrate in the energy field long after the voice has gone quiet. YESERAYE, spoken or received with conscious awareness, plants a resonant seed that keeps singing inside you. It does not require your constant attention to continue its work. It operates, as the best sacred technologies always do, beneath the threshold of ordinary consciousness, at the level where reality is still malleable, still being assembled moment by moment from the raw materials of quantum possibility. Now, I want to address something that your rational mind may be quietly raising right now, because I respect your intelligence too much to ignore it. You may be thinking, is this not simply the power of belief? Is this not just the well-documented placebo effect of expectation dressed in spiritual clothing? And my answer to that is both yes and something far larger than yes. Yes, belief is a force. Expectation rewires neural pathways, alters hormonal environments, shifts the energetic posture of the human body in measurable ways. But sacred sound goes further than belief alone, because it operates even when belief is incomplete, even when doubt is present, even when the conscious mind is skeptical. The vibration does not require your full intellectual consent. It requires only your presence and your willingness to remain open while it works. This is why the ancient traditions did not command their initiates to believe first and then practice. They commanded practice and trusted that belief would follow as the inevitable fruit of resonant experience. There is a story, not from scripture, but from the oral tradition of the desert contemplatives, of a man who sat at the gate of a sacred city for 30 years, believing the gate was sealed to him by divine decree. He prayed at it. He knocked on it. He wept at its base. One morning, a passing elder stopped beside him and simply sang a single note, one pure, sustained tone, and the gate swung open without a sound. The man stood motionless, stunned. He asked the elder what prayer he had spoken, what petition had finally moved heaven to act. The elder looked at him with ancient, undisturbed eyes and said, "I did not petition. I simply matched the frequency the gate was already singing." The gate was never sealed against the man. It was sealed against his frequency. And frequency can always be changed. This is the sovereign truth at the heart of everything we are doing together right now. YESERAYE, then, is not a name you invoke from the outside of the divine. It is a name that reminds the divine field of who you are, a sovereign soul, a rightful heir to the infinite ocean of provision, a being whose very existence is a legitimate claim on the resources of the universe. When you engage with this sacred chant, you are not introducing yourself to God as a stranger hoping for charity. You are declaring your identity to the field, re-establishing a connection that was always there but had been obscured by the static of lack consciousness, fear, and inherited limitation. The name clears the static, and in the clarity that follows, provision flows not as miracle but as correction, the universe simply restoring what was always yours by divine right. And this leads us directly into the second half of the sacred command, the word that transforms awareness into activation, recognition into reality, and the open channel into the flowing river of divine provision itself. Effata. Say it now, under your breath or in the full voice of your sovereign self, whichever feels true to where you are in this moment. Feel how it moves in your mouth. Feel how it starts with a closing, the lips pressing together in the F sound, an almost reluctant compression, like a door holding its last resistance, and then explodes open in the final syllable, a sound that is pure release, pure declaration, pure opening. The phonetic architecture of this word is itself a map of the transformation it describes. Compression, then release. Resistance, then surrender. Sealing, then opening. Your body already knows what this word means before your mind has finished processing it, because your body speaks frequency more fluently than it speaks any human language. In the sacred Aramaic tradition from which this word draws its deepest roots, Effata was not a gentle request. It was not a whispered hope or a polite petition placed at the feet of a divine authority and left to be answered at celestial convenience. Effata was a decree of sovereign command, spoken from the position of one who understood their authority in the spiritual order, who recognized that the human soul, aligned with its divine source, carries the legitimate power to declare reality rather than merely observe it. This is a distinction that most spiritual teachings either avoid or significantly soften, because it places enormous responsibility on the individual. If you have the authority to open gates, then you have also been the one keeping them closed. That is not condemnation. That is liberation disguised as accountability. I want to sit with that for a moment, because it deserves space. The understanding that you have participated, unknowingly, unconsciously, through no malice toward yourself, in the sealing of your own abundance gates is not a source of shame. It is the most empowering realization you will ever have. Because what an unconscious self can seal, a conscious, aligned, sovereign self can open. The gate was never in the hands of circumstance, economy, government, or even the sins of your past. The gate was always in the hands of your frequency. And Effata is the conscious, intentional, quantum act of changing that frequency from sealing to opening, from resistance to reception, from the posture of someone who is waiting to be chosen to the posture of someone who has already chosen themselves. Feel that physically now, and I mean this literally, not as metaphor. Straighten your spine slightly, not rigidly, but with a quiet dignity, like a tree that knows how deep its roots go and therefore has no need to strain toward the light. That physical adjustment is not cosmetic. It changes the geometry of your energy field. It opens the channels through which divine supply moves. The ancient practitioners of sacred sound knew that posture and frequency were inseparable, that a collapsed body broadcast a collapsed signal, and that a dignified, open body broadcast an entirely different message to the quantum field of provision. You are already doing the work just by sitting differently. You are already changing your broadcast. And Effata amplifies that change with the precision of a tuning fork struck against ancient stone. Now, the tradition of sacred decree carries within it a specific understanding that I consider the most important piece of this entire journey, and I want to make sure we do not move past it too quickly. A decree is only as powerful as the identity of the one who speaks it. This is why YESERAYE comes first. You establish who you are, a soul recognized and named by the divine, a being whose identity is rooted in the infinite rather than in the temporary. And from that established identity, Effata is spoken not as a stranger knocking on a locked door but as a rightful heir walking through a gate that was always built for their arrival. The sequence is deliberate. Identity first, then decree. This is the quantum order of sacred manifestation, and every ancient tradition that understood abundance at the deepest level followed this sequence, even when they used different words, different names, different languages. There is something I need you to understand about the gates themselves, because we speak of opening them as though they are external structures, doors in some celestial architecture somewhere beyond the clouds. But the gates of divine provision are not out there. They are layered through your energy field like membranes, like the rings of a tree, like the nested chambers of a nautilus shell. Some of them are ancient, sealed generations before you were born, handed down through bloodlines as inherited energetic patterns. Some of them were sealed in your own lifetime, in moments of deep rejection, profound loss, or devastating betrayal that your system processed as confirmation that provision was not safe, that abundance was followed by loss, that it was better to want less than to risk the devastation of receiving and losing again. Effata speaks to all of these gates simultaneously. It does not work from the outside in. It works from the center of your being outward, dissolving each sealed membrane in sequence, like light moving through water, unstoppable and sovereign. And the gates, as they open, I want you to know what that feels like, because recognition matters. It does not always feel like a thunderclap or a vision or a sudden windfall of material resources, though it can manifest in all of those ways. More often, the first sign that your gates are opening is a subtle but unmistakable shift in your interior atmosphere. A quieting of the anxiety that lived in your chest like a permanent tenant. A softening of the grip that lack consciousness has kept on your imagination. A new ease in the way ideas come to you, opportunities you did not force, connections that appear without effort. A sense that the current of life has changed direction and is now moving toward you rather than past you. These are the early frequencies of open gates. These are the first waters of the harvest flowing through channels that Effata has declared open by divine authority. And this leads us into the heart of the quantum understanding, the invisible field where all of this actually happens, where sacred sound meets divine mechanics, and where the real work of provision is assembled before it ever appears in the material world. Before a single coin appears in your hand, before a single door opens in the material world, before the phone call comes or the opportunity presents itself or the unexpected check arrives in the mail, there is a field. An invisible, responsive, sovereign field of pure potential that exists beneath the surface of everything you can see, touch, measure, or explain. Quantum physicists call it the zero-point field. Ancient mystics called it the breath of God. The Ethiopian sacred tradition calls it the living water beneath the desert, present everywhere, flowing always, accessible only to those who know how to dig in the right place, at the right depth, with the right instrument. That instrument, today, is your voice, your awareness, your willingness to engage with the frequency of YESERAYE EFFATA as more than sound, as a direct transmission into the fabric of the responsive universe itself. Here is what the quantum understanding of provision asks you to accept, not as blind faith but as working hypothesis, held lightly but with genuine openness. The material world, everything you experience as solid, fixed, and real, is not the primary reality. It is the echo. It is the rendered image of a deeper vibrational reality that exists one layer beneath perception, in a dimension where thought and frequency and intention are the raw materials from which physical experience is assembled. Every financial reality you have ever lived, every season of abundance and every season of desperate shortage, began not in the bank account but in the field. It began as a frequency, a pattern of energetic information broadcast by your soul into the responsive quantum medium, and the medium did what it always does. It matched what it received and returned it as experience. The field is not cruel. It is not capricious. It is not playing favorites or rewarding the spiritually sophisticated while ignoring the sincere. It is simply, perfectly, always responsive. This changes everything about how we approach the work of abundance. Because if the field is responsive rather than selective, then the question is never, am I worthy of provision? The question becomes, what am I currently broadcasting, and does that signal match the frequency of divine supply? This is a question you can actually answer. And more importantly, it is a question whose answer you can actually change. Worthiness is a fixed quality, you either have it or you do not, and the agonizing spiritual work of trying to become worthy enough to deserve abundance is one of the most exhausting and futile endeavors the human soul can undertake. But frequency is fluid. Frequency is malleable. Frequency responds to conscious intervention in ways that worthiness-based theology never can. And sacred sound, specifically the intentional engagement with YESERAYE EFFATA, is one of the most direct, most ancient, most quantum-precise methods of conscious frequency intervention available to a human being. Let me give you a picture of how this actually works at the level of the field, because I do not want this to remain abstract. When you engage with the sacred chant with genuine presence, not as background noise, not as spiritual wallpaper playing while your mind wanders elsewhere, but with the full, embodied, intentional attention of a soul that means what it is doing, your energy field begins to emit a specific pattern of coherent vibration. Coherence is the key word here. Most human energy fields, most of the time, are broadcasting incoherent signals, a mixture of hope and fear, desire and doubt, faith and the deeply embedded counterfrequency of lack consciousness. Incoherence produces static, and the field, receiving static, returns static, the experience of mixed results, of provision that arrives and then evaporates, of opportunities that appear and then dissolve before they can be grasped. Sacred chant, engaged with full presence, produces coherence. A single, clean, clear signal. And to a coherent signal, the field responds with coherent return. Now I want to address the question of time, because this is where many sincere seekers become discouraged and abandon their practice just before the harvest arrives. The field does not operate on calendar time. It does not read clocks or respect deadlines or understand the particular urgency you feel about the rent due on the 15th or the debt that has been accumulating while you waited for the tide to turn. The field operates on frequency time, which means that the moment your signal becomes coherent, the response is already initiated, already moving through the layers of reality toward its manifestation in your material experience. The delay you perceive between the activation of your frequency and the appearance of its fruits in your physical world is not silence from the divine. It is the time required for a vibrational reality to travel through the layers of density and become visible to physical perception. The fruit does not appear the moment the seed is planted, but the seed's destiny is sealed the moment it enters prepared soil. Your frequency is the seed. The field is the soil. And YESERAYE EFFATA is the act of planting with sacred intentionality. I want you to consider what the ancient Ethiopian chant masters understood about the relationship between sound and the invisible architecture of reality, an understanding so sophisticated that it preceded modern quantum theory by thousands of years, not through scientific methodology but through the direct empirical experience of sustained contemplative practice. They understood that sound does not merely travel through space. Sound reshapes space. Every tone, every sustained vibration, every intentional frequency creates what they called doorways in the fabric of the invisible world, temporary but real openings through which the energy of the divine field can pour into the human dimension with greater intensity and precision than it could through the relatively impermeable surface of ordinary consciousness. YESERAYE EFFATA, as a sacred chant, does not just speak to the divine. It restructures the medium between you and the divine, creating a channel of least resistance through which provision can flow not as trickle but as river. And here is the piece that I consider the most sacred, the most rarely spoken, the most likely to shift something permanently in the way you understand your own relationship to divine supply. The field, this infinite, responsive, quantum ocean of provision, is not neutral toward you. Neutrality would mean indifference, and indifference is not what the ancient wisdom keepers encountered in their deepest moments of sacred contact. What they encountered was something they could only describe as love. Not sentimental love. Not the love of a parent who wants you to be comfortable and safe. But the fierce, unstoppable, creative love of a force that made you on purpose, for purpose, and therefore has a vested interest in your flourishing that exceeds anything your limited self-concept can currently hold. The field wants to provide. Provision is not something the divine reluctantly releases when sufficient spiritual merit has been accumulated. Provision is the nature of the divine, expressed through the responsive field as the universe's fundamental inclination toward abundance, toward growth, toward the increase of all living things. The gates do not need to be forced. They need to be opened. And YESERAYE EFFATA is the opening. And this is precisely the threshold we cross now, from understanding to experience. From the architecture of the quantum field to the visceral, embodied, transformative reality of standing at the gates themselves. I want you to come with me now. Not in imagination alone. Though imagination is a far more powerful instrument than modern culture has given it credit for, but in the full, embodied, multisensory reality of intentional inner vision. The ancient practitioners called this the interior journey, and they considered it more real, not less real, than the external world, because they understood that the interior landscape is where all external reality is first assembled. What you are about to experience is not escapism. It is not daydreaming. It is a quantum act of vibrational alignment, you placing your energetic self, consciously and deliberately, in the frequency environment of open gates and flowing provisions so that your field can learn the resonance it needs to attract its physical counterpart. This is how sacred visualization has always worked. Not as wishful thinking. As frequency education. Find stillness in whatever way your body allows right now. If you are seated, feel the full weight of your body supported by the chair, by the earth beneath the floor beneath you, by the gravitational field of a planet that has been holding you without fail for every moment of your entire life. That reliability, that unbroken provision of support, is itself a message from the field. You have never been dropped. Not once. Not even in the moments that felt like free fall. The earth caught you. The breath returned. The next moment arrived. Let that recognition soften something in you. The chronic muscular tension of a person who has been bracing against lack for so long that the bracing has become invisible, indistinguishable from their normal posture. Let it soften now. You are held. You have always been held. And what we are about to step into together is the conscious recognition of a provision that has been operating beneath your awareness all along. Now, in your inner vision, I want you to see a landscape. Not a specific religious architecture. Not a church, not a temple in the way temples are typically imagined, but something older and more primordial than any human construction. You are standing in a vast, open space at the hour just before dawn, when the sky is the color of deep indigo at the top and the color of ancient gold along the horizon. The air is perfectly still. The ground beneath your feet is solid, not concrete, not marble, but living earth, warm as skin, carrying the residual heat of 1,000 summers in its depths. You can feel it through the soles of your feet. That warmth is rising through you like a slow tide, moving from the earth through your body, unhurried and sovereign, the way the sun moves across the sky, inevitable, unstoppable, governed by laws that no human fear can interrupt. Before you, at a distance that feels both near and ancient, stand the gates. And I want you to see them clearly, because their appearance matters. Not because the gates themselves are the source of your provision, but because your relationship to them in this moment of inner vision is a mirror of your current vibrational posture toward abundance. What do the gates look like to you? Are they enormous, overwhelming, sealed with chains that suggest a permanence of closure? Or are they tall and golden, slightly ajar, with warm light pressing through the gap in a way that suggests they have been waiting patiently, faithfully, without losing hope, for you to arrive? Whatever you see, hold it without judgment. It is simply information. It is your energy field showing you its current configuration. And the beauty of this moment is that the configuration is about to change. Begin to walk toward the gates. Feel the ground beneath each step, the solidity, the support, the earth receiving your weight and returning it as momentum. With each step, you feel the warmth in your body intensifying, not uncomfortably but with the quality of something that has been sleeping and is now waking, something that has been compressed and is now beginning to expand. This expansion is your field beginning to resonate with the frequency of what stands before you. The gates are singing even now, a sound below the threshold of ordinary hearing, a vibration your bones can feel before your ears can process it. It is the frequency of open supply. The frequency of divine provision in its purest, most primordial form. And your body, your magnificent quantum-tuned instrument of a body, is already beginning to match it. You are now close enough to touch the gates. Reach out your hand in your inner vision and place your palm flat against the surface. Feel the temperature, not cold as locked things are cold, but warm. Alive, vibrating subtly against your palm like a bell that has just been struck and is still resonating. This warmth is the warmth of provision that is already assembled on the other side, already real, already yours in the field, already waiting in the vibrational dimension for the frequency shift that will allow it to cross into your material experience. It is not distant. It is not withheld. It is pressed against the other side of this gate the way rain presses against a window, present, insistent, and requiring only the opening to pour through. Now, from the deepest place in your body, from the solar plexus, from the sacred center where your personal frequency is generated and broadcast, I want you to feel the sound of YESERAYE EFFATA rising. Not as a thought, not as a mental recitation, as a physical sensation, a vibration that begins in your core and moves outward through your chest, your throat, your skull, your hands pressed against the gate. You do not need to vocalize it in this moment, though if you feel moved to, let it come. Simply feel it resonating in your field, the ancient syllables moving through you like a tuning fork that has found its perfect partner. YESERAYE, the name that tells the field who you are, heir, sovereign, recognized, named. And then TFFE, the decree, the opening, the unstoppable, ancient, quantum command that what has been sealed must now open, not because you are forcing it, but because you are finally broadcasting the frequency the gate has been waiting for all along. And the gates open, not with drama, not with thunder or blinding light or the kind of spectacular display that the ego imagines divine breakthrough must look like. They open the way the most profound things always open, quietly, inevitably, with the deep, resonant certainty of something that was always going to happen, that could not have been permanently prevented, that was written into the architecture of your destiny before you arrived on this earth. The gates open, and through them comes not a flood but a river, steady, sovereign, unhurried, infinite in its source and unstoppable in its direction. The river is moving toward you. The river has always been moving toward you. You simply, finally, stood in its path. And this leads us to the laws that govern how this river flows, the three sacred principles that determine whether divine supply continues to move through an open gate or whether, over time, the gate begins to close again. Every river needs banks. Not to restrict the water, the banks of a river do not diminish its power or reduce its volume. They give it direction. They concentrate its force into something navigable, something purposeful, something that can turn a water wheel, nourish a valley, sustain an entire civilization along its course. Without banks, a river becomes a swamp, water present everywhere and useful nowhere, spread so thin across the landscape that it loses the momentum required to carry anything of substance. The gates of abundance, once opened through the sacred frequency of YESERAYE EFFATA, release a river of divine supply into your life. And the three laws of sacred wealth alignment are the banks. They do not limit what flows. They ensure that what flows arrives with enough force and direction to actually transform your material reality, rather than dissipating into the swamp of unfocused wanting. These laws are not rules imposed from the outside by a theological authority demanding compliance. They are descriptions of how the quantum field of provision actually operates, observed across thousands of years of sacred practice, encoded into the wisdom traditions of cultures that understood abundance not as a financial concept but as a spiritual physics. You do not obey these laws out of fear of punishment for breaking them. You align with them the way you align with gravity, because working with the fundamental laws of reality is simply more efficient, more elegant, and more effective than spending your energy pretending they do not exist or arguing with their inconvenience. The first law, the law of sovereign identity. The field of divine provision does not respond to desperation. It does not respond to pleading, to spiritual bargaining, or to the frantic energy of a soul that has collapsed its identity into its lack. This is not because the divine is cruel or indifferent to genuine suffering. The ancient wisdom makes abundantly clear that the heart of the divine is moved by human pain in ways that exceed our capacity to fully comprehend. But the field responds to frequency, and desperation broadcasts a specific frequency, one of contracted identity, of a self that has defined itself as insufficient, as someone to whom provision must be given from the outside because there is nothing within capable of generating or attracting it. This contracted frequency, regardless of how sincere the suffering behind it, creates the very energetic condition that repels the abundant supply trying to move toward it. Not as cosmic irony, as simple quantum physics, like charges repel. A field broadcasting lack cannot simultaneously receive abundance, because abundance and lack are not merely different quantities of the same thing. They are fundamentally different frequencies, operating at incompatible resonances. Sovereign identity is the correction. It is the deliberate, practiced, sometimes fiercely maintained orientation of the self toward its true nature, not as a victim of circumstance, not as a supplicant at the feet of a capricious divine authority, but as a being whose existence is itself a declaration of worth, whose soul is recognized and named by the infinite field, whose legitimate claim on divine supply is not contingent on performance, perfection, or the absence of past mistakes. Practicing sovereign identity does not mean pretending you are not in pain. It does not mean performing confidence you do not feel or denying the reality of your financial circumstances. It means holding a dual awareness, fully honest about what is currently manifested in your material world, while simultaneously rooted in the unshakable knowing that your material circumstances are not the truth about you. They are the echo of a past frequency, and you are generating a new one, right now, in this moment, with every breath taken in the posture of a sovereign rather than a supplicant. The second law, the law of reciprocal flow. The infinite ocean of provision operates on the principle of circulation, not transaction, circulation. The distinction is critical, and the confusion between them is responsible for more blocked abundance than almost any other single misunderstanding in the spiritual wealth tradition. Transaction is an exchange between equals of finite resources. I give this, I receive that, and the ledger is balanced. Circulation is the movement of an infinite supply through a living system. It flows in, it flows through, it flows out, and the very act of allowing it to flow out creates the energetic vacuum that draws more in. The ancient wisdom teachers used the image of breathing. You do not hoard your exhale out of fear that you will run out of breath. You release it completely, knowing with sovereign certainty that the inhale is not just possible but inevitable, that the very act of releasing fully is what creates the capacity to receive fully. Provision operates on exactly this principle. This law does not mandate a specific percentage given to a specific institution. It is not about tithing in the legalistic sense, though practices of conscious, intentional generosity are one of the most powerful practical expressions of this law. It is about the orientation of your relationship to the supply that flows through you. Does it flow or does it pool? Do you receive and release, or do you receive and clutch? The clutching is understandable. It comes from the same lack consciousness we have been addressing throughout this entire journey, the deep-seated fear that what arrives may not be replaced, that the river may run dry if you allow any of it to escape your grasp. But the clutching itself, the energetic posture of hoarding, sends a signal to the field that you do not trust the river to keep flowing. And the field, responsive as always, matches your signal. It slows the flow to match your demonstrated relationship with it. Open hands receive more than clenched fists. This is not a moral statement. It is a description of quantum dynamics. The third law, the law of embodied expectation. This is the law that separates those who understand abundance intellectually from those who actually live it. Embodied expectation is not the same as wishful thinking, and the distinction between them is the difference between a frequency and a fantasy. Wishful thinking exists entirely in the mental dimension. It is a pleasant story the mind tells itself about a desired future, accompanied by the subtle but unmistakable emotional signature of doubt. The story says this will happen, but the frequency underneath says, I am not sure. And the field, which reads frequency rather than story, responds to the doubt rather than the declaration. Embodied expectation is different in kind, not just in degree. It is a state in which the body itself has accepted the reality of incoming provision, in which the nervous system has been recalibrated to the frequency of a person who expects to receive, who has received before and recognizes the feeling of abundance moving toward them, whose physical posture, breathing pattern, muscular tension, and hormonal environment all broadcast the coherent signal of someone whose harvest is already assured. Cultivating embodied expectation is the most practically demanding of the three laws, because it requires you to feel something before it has physically arrived, to let your body know a reality that your eyes have not yet confirmed. This is what the ancient traditions meant by faith. Not intellectual assent to a doctrinal position, not the suppression of doubt through force of will, but the somatic, cellular, quantum-level practice of inhabiting the frequency of your answered prayer while the answer is still assembling itself in the invisible field. Every time you engage with YESERAYE EFFATA, you are practicing embodied expectation. You are choosing deliberately and repeatedly to vibrate at the frequency of open gates rather than sealed ones, of flowing rivers rather than dry riverbeds, of harvests rather than famines. And every repetition deepens the groove in your energetic structure, making the frequency of abundance more native, more automatic, more effortlessly your default broadcast. These three laws work together as a single, integrated system. Sovereign identity creates the signal. Reciprocal flow creates the channel. Embodied expectation creates the magnetic pull. Together, they transform the opened gate into a sustained, self-reinforcing cycle of divine provision. Not a one-time windfall that exhausts itself, but a living, breathing, ever-replenishing current of supply that grows stronger with each conscious act of alignment. This is the architecture of sacred wealth. Not a formula, but a way of being. Not a technique, but a transformation. And this is precisely where we must address the most insidious obstacle that stands between the open gate and the flowing river, the frequency of lack itself, which does not surrender quietly, does not yield to a single prayer or a single moment of insight, but requires a specific, sustained, embodied practice of dissolution. That practice begins now. Lack has a sound. I know that may seem strange. We think of lack as an absence, a silence, the sound of nothing arriving, nothing filling the empty spaces. But lack is not silence. Lack is a frequency, and like all frequencies, it has a specific vibrational signature that your body broadcasts when it is operating from that orientation. It is the low, dull hum of chronic tension in the stomach. It is the shallow, slightly constricted quality of breath taken by someone who has been bracing against disappointment for so long that bracing has become their resting state. It is the subtle but constant muscular contraction of a body that is waiting for the next blow, the next shortfall, the next confirmation that provision is unreliable and the universe is indifferent. These are not character flaws. They are the accumulated physical residue of a frequency that has been running in your system for years, possibly decades, possibly across generations. And today, through the decree practice I am about to guide you through, we are going to begin dismantling it layer by layer, from the inside out. A decree practice is different from a prayer practice, and understanding that difference is essential before we begin. Prayer, in its most common form, is a conversation between a finite self and an infinite other, a reaching toward something beyond, a petition sent upward and outward in the hope that it will be received and answered. Prayer has profound power, and I will never diminish it. But a decree practice operates from a different energetic position. A decree is spoken not from below toward above, but from the center of the self outward into the field, from the place of established identity, sovereign awareness, and quantum authority that we have been building throughout this entire journey. A decree does not ask the field to change. It declares a new frequency into the field and commands the field to respond. It is, in the most literal sense, a vibrational instruction delivered to the quantum medium of reality by a soul that knows its authority and is not afraid to exercise it. Before we begin the decree sequence, I want you to prepare your field. Take 3 slow, complete breaths, not the shallow chest breathing of daily anxiety, but full, deliberate breaths that begin in the belly, rise through the chest, and release completely, carrying with them on the exhale everything that has accumulated in your energy field since the last time you consciously cleared it. With the first exhale, release the accumulated tension of financial worry, every number you have mentally calculated in the dark, every scenario of shortage you have rehearsed, every moment of dread about a bill, a debt, a gap between what arrives and what is needed. Let it leave your body on the breath. With the second exhale, release the inherited frequency of lack, the ancestral programming, the generational belief systems, the voices of people you loved who taught you, without meaning harm, that provision was scarce and uncertainty was the permanent condition of the human experience. Honor the people. Release the frequency they carried. With the third exhale, release your own resistance to receiving, that quiet, sometimes unconscious conviction that abundance, if it comes to you, will be taken away, that it is safer to want little than to risk the devastation of wanting much and receiving nothing. Release it, all of it. The exhale carries it out of your field, and the field, responsive as always, begins immediately to fill the cleared space with something far more sovereign. Now we decree. Read these words not with your eyes but with your whole body. Let each line land in your chest before you move to the next. Let the pauses between them be as full as the words themselves. I am YESERAYE, recognized, named, and known by the infinite field of divine provision. My identity is not my lack. My identity is not my history. My identity is the sovereign frequency of a soul that was made for abundance and is returning to that truth right now. I decree that every frequency of lack that has operated in my energy field, inherited, accumulated, self-generated, or imposed, is hereby dissolved. Not suppressed, not managed. Dissolved at the root, at the quantum level, with the irreversible authority of a soul aligned with its divine source. I decree that the gates of divine provision in my life are open. Open now. Open completely. Open with the unstoppable certainty of Effata, the ancient command that what was sealed must yield to the frequency of sovereign alignment. I decree that I am a vessel of circulation, not accumulation. That divine supply flows through me with increasing volume and velocity. That what I release returns multiplied, and what I receive is held with gratitude and released with grace. I decree that my body, my nervous system, my cellular architecture, and my energetic field are all now recalibrated to the frequency of embodied expectation. I expect provision. I recognize it when it moves toward me. I receive it without apology, without diminishment, without the unconscious guilt of someone who does not believe they deserve what the divine has always intended for them. YESERAYE EFFATA. It is spoken. It is decreed. It is done in the field, and therefore it is done in the world. Stay with the silence after the last line. Do not rush past it. The silence after a decree is not emptiness. It is the field rearranging itself in response to the new frequency you have just broadcast. It is the moment between the stone dropped into the water and the first ripple reaching the shore. Something is moving even now in the invisible architecture of your reality. Something has shifted. The frequency mismatch that sealed your gates has been interrupted, disrupted, dissolved to the degree that your presence and intention allowed in this moment. And each time you return to this practice, each time you speak these decrees with growing familiarity, growing embodied certainty, growing sovereign ease, the dissolution goes deeper. The gate opens wider. The river flows stronger. And now we arrive at the final movement of this sacred journey, the place where all of this understanding, all of this activation, all of this vibrational work converges into the practical, embodied reality of actually receiving what has been decreed. This is the harvest protocol, and it is the part that most spiritual teachings on abundance skip entirely, leaving their students activated but directionless, frequencies shifted but hands still empty because nobody taught them how to actually hold what the universe is trying to place in them. There is a particular kind of spiritual tragedy that almost nobody talks about, and I have watched it unfold in the lives of sincere, devoted, genuinely seeking people more times than I can count. It is the tragedy of the prepared field that never gets harvested. The soul that does all the inner work, that clears the frequency, opens the gates, speaks the decrees, aligns the energy, and then, at the precise moment when divine provision begins to move toward them in tangible, material form, unconsciously steps out of its path. Not through laziness, not through lack of faith, but through a deep, invisible, almost architectural resistance to actually receiving. A resistance so woven into the fabric of their identity that it operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, invisible until you know exactly what to look for. Today, you are going to know what to look for. And more importantly, you are going to know how to stand still when the harvest arrives, arms open, field ready, without the reflexive flinching that has historically caused abundance to pass within inches of your outstretched hands without landing. Receiving is a skill. I want that to settle into you fully, because the culture of spiritual seeking tends to place all of its emphasis on the asking, on prayer, on decree, on visualization, on alignment practices of every variety, and almost none of its emphasis on the equally critical, equally sophisticated, equally learnable art of actually receiving what has been asked for. We practice asking. We rehearse our petitions. We refine our decrees. But receiving, the moment when the universe responds, when provision appears in the doorway of your life in whatever form it has chosen to take, receiving is assumed to be automatic, effortless, the natural and inevitable result of all the inner work. It is not. Receiving is its own discipline, its own practice, its own frequency that must be consciously cultivated if the open gates and the flowing river are to translate into actual transformation of your material experience. The first dimension of the harvest protocol is what I call radical recognition. Divine provision almost never arrives in the form your ego imagined when it was doing the asking. The mind, when it thinks about abundance, tends to generate very specific pictures. A particular sum of money arriving through a particular channel, a specific opportunity manifesting in a predictable way, a recognizable door opening in a familiar wall. And when the universe responds with something that does not match the mental picture, an unexpected conversation, an unusual idea, a connection that seems tangential, an opportunity that arrives in an unfamiliar package, the conditioned mind dismisses it, files it under coincidence, overlooks it in the ongoing scan for the provision it decided in advance would look like. Radical recognition is the practice of expanding your perceptual aperture wide enough to see provision in every form it takes, including the forms your planning mind would never have chosen and your doubting mind is tempted to dismiss as irrelevant. Every idea that rises in you with unusual clarity. Every person who appears in your path with an offer or an invitation. Every door that opens even slightly, even in an unexpected wall. These are the harvest arriving. Radical recognition means you see them for what they are. The second dimension is what I call sovereign acceptance. And this one cuts deeper because it addresses something that lives in the most intimate chambers of the self, the complicated, often unconscious relationship that many deeply spiritual people have with material abundance. There is a strand of spiritual teaching, present across many traditions in varying degrees, that associates material wealth with spiritual compromise, that suggests the truly holy person wants little, needs less, and views the abundance of the material world with suspicion if not outright disdain. I understand where this teaching comes from. I understand the legitimate spiritual concern at its root, the recognition that attachment to material things can become a substitute for genuine spiritual depth, that the pursuit of wealth can crowd out the pursuit of wisdom, that comfort can anesthetize the soul to its deeper hungers. These are real dangers, worth naming and navigating carefully. But the overcorrection, the elevation of material scarcity to a spiritual virtue, has done profound damage to generations of sincere seekers who learned to equate suffering with holiness and abundance with moral compromise. Sovereign acceptance is the reclamation of your right to receive material provision without spiritual apology. It is the understanding that the divine field of supply does not consider your financial flourishing to be in competition with your spiritual depth, that, in fact, the ancient wisdom across virtually every tradition that has not been corrupted by institutional power structures consistently presents material abundance as a natural expression of spiritual alignment rather than a contradiction of it. When you are aligned with the infinite field of divine provision, abundance flows. not as a reward for spiritual achievement, but as the simple, natural consequence of a soul in coherent resonance with the source of all supply. Receiving that abundance without guilt, without the reflexive minimizing of what arrives, without the unconscious habit of pushing back against provision because some deep part of you has decided you are more spiritually credible when you are struggling, this is sovereign acceptance. And it is one of the most radical acts of faith available to a human being in this particular cultural moment. The third dimension of the harvest protocol is active stewarding. And this is where the spiritual and the practical meet in a way that some purely metaphysical teachings are uncomfortable acknowledging. The harvest does not steward itself. The river that flows through the open gates does not automatically organize itself into the structures, systems, and decisions that allow it to sustain and grow your material life. The quantum field delivers supply. The sovereign soul decides what to do with it. And the quality of those decisions, the wisdom, the intentionality, the practical intelligence applied to the management of what the field provides, determines whether the harvest feeds a season or a lifetime. Ancient farmers understood this with a precision that we have largely lost in an era of instant gratification and passive consumption. They knew that the harvest required as much skill and effort as the planting. They knew that the grain received carelessly would rot, that the abundance of one season, mismanaged, would fail to seed the next. Stewarding is the practical expression of reciprocal flow, the way you demonstrate to the field, through your concrete actions with what you have already received, that you are a reliable vessel for increasing supply. This does not mean anxiety about money management or the paralysis of perfectionism about every financial decision. It means a quality of conscious, intentional, wisdom-guided relationship with the material resources that flow through your life, one that honors their source, respects their power to multiply when handled with intelligence, and understands that every financial decision is, at some level, a frequency broadcast about your relationship with abundance. When you spend from scarcity, making choices driven by fear of shortage rather than wisdom about value, you broadcast the frequency of lack even in the midst of plenty. When you invest, give, save, and spend from sovereignty, from the clear-eyed, unhurried, divinely guided orientation of someone who trusts the river to keep flowing, you broadcast the frequency of abundance even when the current amount seems modest. The field reads the frequency. Boys. It responds to how you handle what you have as a signal of how you will handle what is coming. Steward what arrives with sovereign intelligence, and you confirm to the field that the channel you have opened can bear increasing volume. Now I want you to feel something specific right in this moment, a physical sensation that I am going to ask you to memorize, to catalog in your body's experiential library so that you can return to it deliberately whenever the resistance to receiving begins to tighten in your field. I want you to feel what it is like to simply say yes. Not yes to a specific amount or a specific form of provision. Just yes to the river. Yes to the flow. Yes to the harvest arriving in whatever sovereign, unpredictable, magnificently creative form the divine field chooses to send it. Feel your hands open. Feel your chest expand. Feel the muscular bracing, that chronic, invisible tensing against disappointment. Soften and release, the way a fist unclenches after a long time of holding nothing but air. This is the posture of receiving. This is the body of someone whose harvest is not merely coming but already, in the most real and fundamental sense, already here. Assembled in the field, pressing against the open gates, moving through the river channels that YESERAYE EFFATA has declared open and the three laws of sacred wealth alignment have prepared to receive. You are ready to receive. You have always been ready. The readiness was buried under the frequency of lack, under the inherited doubt, under the accumulated weight of seasons when the harvest seemed not to come. But it was always there. the sovereign capacity of your soul to receive the fullness of what the divine field has always intended for you. It is uncovered now, activated now, aligned now, and what is aligned in the field manifests in the world. Not if, not maybe, and the when is closer than your fear has ever allowed you to believe. And this brings us to the final act of this sacred journey, the sealing of everything we have built together into a covenant that will outlast this moment, that will continue to resonate in your energy field long after the sound of these words has faded, that will serve as the anchor point of your new frequency every time the old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. This is the most sacred part, and you have earned it. A covenant is not a contract. A contract is a conditional agreement between parties of roughly equal standing. I will do this if you do that, and the agreement dissolves if either party fails to fulfill their obligation. A covenant is something older, something more primal and more binding than any contract ever written. A covenant is a declaration of identity, a statement of who you are and what reality you claim as yours, made not from a position of negotiation but from the bedrock of absolute spiritual certainty. Covenants in the ancient tradition were not signed. They were spoken. They were carved into the air with the sovereign voice of the one making them, witnessed by the invisible field of divine reality, and sealed not with ink but with the full, embodied commitment of a soul that meant every word. Today, you are making a covenant. Not with a church, not with a religious institution, not with any external authority of any kind. You are making a covenant with the infinite field of divine provision, with the quantum reality that created you on purpose, named you through the sacred frequency of YESERAYE, opened your gates through the ancient authority of EFFATA, and has been moving heaven and earth to get provision to you through every channel you would agree to leave open. I want you to understand what you are sealing in this moment. You are not sealing a wish. You are not finalizing a request and submitting it to a divine inbox to be processed at celestial convenience. You are sealing a frequency shift, a fundamental, quantum-level reorientation of your energy field from the broadcast pattern of lack to the broadcast pattern of sovereign abundance. You are declaring with the full authority of your aligned, activated, gate-open soul that the old frequency no longer has your consent to run in your system, that the inherited patterns of lack consciousness have been served their notice, that the gates are open and the river is flowing and your hands are open and your field is clear and your identity is sovereign and your harvest is assured. This is what you are sealing, and the sealing is done through declaration, through the spoken word, the vibrating air, the sound that reshapes the invisible architecture of your reality in the same way that YESERAYE EFFATA has been reshaping it throughout every moment of this sacred journey. Before I give you the covenant words, I want to tell you something about what happens after, because too many people make powerful declarations in moments of spiritual elevation and then, as the ordinary world reasserts itself with its noise and its demands and its relentless presentation of evidence that the old frequency was correct, they quietly allow the covenant to fade. They do not abandon it deliberately. They simply fail to reinforce it, fail to return to it, fail to speak it again on the days when speaking it feels less like truth and more like defiance. And defiance, sustained long enough, becomes the new truth. This is how covenants work. Not through a single declaration but through the repeated, daily, sometimes stubborn choice to keep affirming the frequency of the covenant against the static of the world's contrary evidence. Every morning that you return to YESERAYE EFFATA, every time you speak these covenant words, whether they feel electric with certainty or whether you are speaking them through gritted teeth against the pressure of circumstances that have not yet caught up with your frequency shift. Every single repetition is a reinforcement of the covenant. Every repetition deepens the groove. Every repetition makes the frequency of sovereign abundance more native, more automatic, more irreversibly yours. The covenant. Speak these words aloud if you are able. If you cannot speak them aloud in this moment, Speak them in the interior voice, the deep, resonant voice that lives beneath the surface chatter of the ordinary mind, the voice your soul uses when it is speaking the truth about itself without performance or pretension. I, a sovereign soul recognized and named by the divine field of infinite provision, do hereby declare my covenant with abundance. I declare that lack is not my inheritance. Lack was a frequency I carried, not a truth I embodied. And I release it now, completely, permanently, with the irreversible authority of a soul that has heard the sacred chant of YESERAYE EFFATA and recognized in its resonance the sound of its own true nature. I declare that the gates of divine provision in my life are open. They were opened by the ancient frequency of sacred sound. They are held open by my sovereign identity, my practice of reciprocal flow, and my embodied expectation of continuous, increasing, unstoppable supply. No circumstance, no past pattern, no inherited frequency, and no voice of doubt, internal or external, has the authority to close what the sacred decree of Effata has opened. I declare that I am a harvest soul, that I was planted in this earth at this time with the specific divine intention that I would flourish, not merely survive, not merely endure, but flourish with the full, unapologetic, sovereign abundance that reflects the nature of the infinite field that created me. My flourishing is not accidental. It is not luck. It is not the result of circumstance finally aligning in my favor. It is the natural, inevitable quantum consequence of a soul in coherent resonance with its divine source. I declare that I receive, without apology, without minimizing, without the reflex of spiritual guilt that has historically caused me to push away or diminish what the field was trying to place in my open hands. I receive because receiving is my sacred right. I receive because the field gives not from scarcity but from the infinite ocean of divine supply that has no bottom, no edges, and no preference for depletion. I receive because to refuse the harvest is to refuse the divine generosity that planted the seed. And I am done refusing. I declare that what I receive, I steward with wisdom, release with grace, and multiply through the sovereign intelligence of a soul that understands the law of reciprocal flow. I am not a reservoir. I am a river. Supply flows to me, through me, and out from me in forms that bless my life and the lives of those my life touches. The river does not run dry. The source does not diminish. The harvest does not end. YESERAYE, I am known. Effata, the gates are open. The covenant is sealed. The frequency is set. The harvest is now. Hold the silence after the last word. Do not fill it. Do not reach for the next thought or the next task or the next demand of the ordinary world. Simply remain in the resonance of what you have just spoken, in the field that your covenant words have just restructured, in the quantum reality that is already, even now, assembling the material forms of what you have declared. Feel the warmth in your hands, that same warmth we identified at the very beginning of this journey, the warmth of readiness. It is different now, deeper, more settled, less like anticipation and more like recognition, less like hoping and more like knowing. That shift, from anticipation to recognition, from hoping to knowing, is the most reliable sign that your frequency has moved, that the covenant has landed not just in your mind but in your field, that something real, something quantum, something permanent has shifted in the architecture of your energetic relationship with divine provision. You came to this sacred space carrying the accumulated weight of sealed gates, the inherited frequencies, the cultural programming, the personal history of seasons when the harvest seemed not to come. You leave it as something different, not as someone who has been given a new technique to apply or a new system to follow, but as someone whose fundamental frequency has been restructured at the level where reality is actually made. The gates are open. The river is flowing. The covenant is sealed. The sacred chant of YESERAYE EFFATA has done what it was always designed to do, not just in the ancient chambers and desert temples where it was first spoken, but here, in the living present of your life, in the quantum field that surrounds and permeates and responds to every cell of your sovereign, abundant, harvest-ready soul. If you feel the resonance shifting inside you, if something in your chest is quieter than it was when you arrived, if your hands feel different, if the chronic tension of lack has loosened even slightly its grip on your nervous system, declare it. Write it in the comments below. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. Because declaration is the final act of the covenant. Saying out loud, even in the public space of a comment, "My gates are open," is a quantum act of embodied expectation. It is you telling the field, in the most concrete way available to you in this moment, that you believe what was decreed, that you received what was offered, that the harvest is not a distant hope but a present, vibrating, sovereign reality. The chant continues, YESERAYE EFFATA. Return to it. Not because you need to keep earning what has been given. The covenant does not work on an earning basis. Return to it because frequency, like any living thing, is nourished by attention. Because the groove of sovereign abundance deepens with every deliberate, conscious choice to vibrate at its frequency rather than the frequency of lack. Because the river flows strongest through channels that are regularly, lovingly, sovereignly cleared. Return to YESERAYE EFFATA the way you return to breath, not as effort but as the most natural, most essential, most life-giving thing you know how to do. Your gates are open. Your harvest is here. Receive it. If your resonance shifted during this sacred journey, declare your readiness in the comments. Share this with someone whose gates need opening. And return to the sacred chant of YESERAYE EFFATA whenever the world attempts to reseal what has been permanently, sovereignly, quantum irreversibly opened.